Welcome to From the Source, a podcast where we connect directly with the marketers, buyers, and operators who are building and scaling modern B2B growth engines. In an industry filled with noise, buzzwords, and endless tactics, the show focuses on what actually works. Each conversation dives into how experienced marketing leaders think about demand generation, vendor partnerships, team alignment, emerging technologies like AI, and the real challenges of building effective marketing organizations. Today, I'm joined by Rebecca Halpern, Senior Marketing Manager, Integrated Digital Solutions at Conduent. Hi, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's great to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. I know we had some chance to connect in the past, and your experiences and your vision on how important it is to align with internal organizations and set proper expectations with stakeholders, I think is a much welcomed conversation in today's space. So really appreciate the time. Thank you. May I call you Becca, or would you prefer Rebecca?
Yeah. Call me Becca. Becca's great.
Becca. I'm a David. So unless you're mad at me, then you can call me David. Right? So jumping right in, Becca, I think cutting through the noise is a big topic for us. I mean, there's an incredible amount of noise in the B2B marketing space, from gated content to AI generated outreach. I'm curious, how do you separate prospects who are genuinely interested in your services or to speak and connect with your teams versus those that may just be filling out forms?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, today's audiences, all of us, myself included, are just overwhelmed. We're getting sales emails, marketing emails, LinkedIn messages. We're sitting on the couch at night getting ads in front of our faces. So I think the real challenge isn't being seen, it's being relevant. So I would say that what I try to understand is where somebody is in their journey, right? Are they researching? Are they actively evaluating? Are they planning for next year? And so one great tactic for that is using, really intentional qualifying questions. So that really helps you, identify where someone is in that journey. So I think that's a great place and a great tool that people can use. And then obviously intent data. I know that's not new, but seeing what their behavior is, are there repeated visits to web pages? And so those are some tactics that we use that I find really useful. You just have to remember that not every form fill is high intent. So the real job here is separating curiosity from true buying behavior.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And familiar with the intent space, as you mentioned, it's not new, but I think it is evolving still. And I'm curious what your vision or your view on the source is. How not all intent is created equally, right? So how do you comb through that noise and get to the relevant sources of intent to be more armed for the dissection?
Yeah, I mean, you also have to think about when someone's filling out a form and answering a qualifying question, you do have to take that with a grain of salt. But I think when you have that information coupled together, you have them answering the question, you're seeing their activity online, it does definitely give you a better picture of where they are in that journey. So, kind of using those two together is quite helpful. But at the end of the day, you are going to get people that you reach out to them, they filled out a form, they've answered your qualifying question, and they say, hey, I'm not interested, I'm not the decision maker. So you do have to be able to pivot. You have to ask the right questions. So it's really a blend of using those things together, I think.
Right. I think that's a great segue into the next question, which is, quality versus quantity,
Mhm.
right? I think every marketing team wrestles with the balance between volume and quality. How do you personally think about that balance?
Yeah, I mean, it's tempting to chase those big numbers because they look really good on a dashboard, right? But
Right.
definitely the volume without the intent it's just clogging the funnel. So I think that quality leads really share three things. I'd say they fit your ICP, right? They are engaging meaningfully. And then most importantly, what you'll get from that qualifying question is the timing is right. And so I think where teams can go wrong is just kind of assuming that every download equals readiness.
Heard. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I think we often lose sight of, the actual timing and relevance of messaging. I think at any given time, salespeople especially, we think everybody's in market at all times, and that's
Yeah.
just not the case. Right.
Yeah. And we have to remember too, sales, they're so busy, they're working so many leads. And so I think a piece of that too is just having that alignment with sales in this process. It's really important.
It's almost as if you know what the question is next, because again, a perfect segue, which is around internal alignment, right? I mean, how critical to you is alignment between marketing, sales, revenue leadership, even that C-suite? How does it impact your lead strategy? How does it define your success metrics?
I mean, it's absolutely everything. I think people relate to this because without that alignment, marketing feels like we're constantly over explaining ourselves. Sales feels like they're being handed cold leads. So you really need to have that strong alignment. Everybody knows, what an MQL is, what should be handed off when, even things like process. What is the next step? So I think when it's weak, you're not running a pipeline. You're just running a guessing game.
Right. No, it's fair. And I think definitions you touched on are incredibly important because I think companies have different definitions of MQL, of, what's a sales ready lead? Is there such a
SAL.
thing as a sales ready lead, and having that alignment on just definitions can be, game changing. So
Yeah,
that's very good insight. Thank you.
of course. And I feel like
Which I,
follow up, next steps, what are you supposed to do with them? Having that clarity and that alignment, I really think makes all the difference.
yeah, you almost need a playbook, right? They don't.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to be marching on the same, instructions at the same timing, because as you stated earlier, timing is everything. Messaging relevance, all of that really plays a big factor in this. So, no, couldn't agree more. Thank you. And I think that goes to setting expectations with those same teams, right? It's not just about alignment on definitions; it's about actually setting expectations. So I see that as being one of the biggest challenges in lead generation. I think, when we have uncomfortable conversations, as we all do, it's because expectations weren't aligned. So how do you view that? How do you go about making sure that that is something that's addressed?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to get all of your stakeholders together and you need to discuss things and plan things together before you kick off a program. I think a really good approach is, like you said, transparency and education. So you need to be able to explain what realistic conversion looks like. That's a really good place to start, right? You might get in a lot of leads, they're not all converting. I'd rather promise fewer high intent leads than just inflate numbers to hit that vanity target, like we spoke about. So I
Right.
think setting expectations, having clear definitions certainly helps. People just need to understand that not all results are going to be instant.
Yeah, I think you mentioned vanity metrics, and that's a huge moving target for companies today, right? I think wise people before us once said, "If it don't make dollars, it don't make sense," which
Yeah,
is the unified target that everybody's trying to hit. So I think refocusing the teams on that metric, it can be very valuable in setting those proper expectations.
getting buy-in. Maybe this is a question, but around kind of getting buy-in to programs, I think a lot of time, if sales leaders or sales team members have lost trust in marketing programs, they haven't seen results, making sure that you're really explaining, building the trust, making sure they're as invested in the program as you are, is super important because if they're feeling motivated and excited and part of the program, I think it's with anything in life, right? You'll typically see better results if people are engaged and invested. So stakeholder investment, I would say, is as important as stakeholder alignment.
That is perfect. We talk about, we work with companies that have 2 year sales cycles and 30-day sales cycles. And when you're trying to put together the expectation of revenue, right, and that's a unified measurement, that's not always feasible. With a 2 year sales cycle, it's a little bit harder to judge success. So making sure that there is alignment in what those metrics, that metric waterfall looks like leading up to that final revenue number.
Exactly. Yeah.
Today's buyer group looks different. I think there's a lot more members involved from different parts of the organization, and they don't all speak the same language. They don't all care about the same things. We have this conversation ad nauseum in my world, right? So I guess I'm curious how you go about putting together a content strategy that is relevant and has value to each member or influencer in that buyer committee.
Yeah, I love that question. I think a lot of us get really stuck in our silos. So something like this becomes a challenge. So you really have to think about your audience. What are their pain points, not what are our internal company priorities? And I think like a good filter for that is, or a really simple test is just ask yourself, if I didn't work here, would I care about this?
I
So
love that question.
it's such a simple question to ask yourself, but a lot of times I think, oh, I'm really focused on promoting this product or this service. I'm going to get in front of the audience. But if you don't take it from the angle of what is their pain point, what do they care about, what are they trying to solve, it's not helpful to them. So I would also say, kind of going back to our, you know, earlier topic, but your content doesn't have to be long. It has to be valuable. It has to be useful, easy to consume, right? And then I would also say, you have to be nimble and monitor things. If you have a great, media or just a partner, they'll tell you, hey, this is not performing. We need to switch things out. So just, you got to be ready to change things and make edits and optimize as you create content.
On the point of partners, I think that's a
Mm.
key part of this, right? Because you're talking about aligning your internal teams and setting expectations, but I think the right partner, the right vendors, the people you work with externally can be just as influential or important in these
Absolutely.
programs. So when you're evaluating partners or external partners, what criteria matters most to you?
Yeah. This might this might sound like dating, but I look for someone who wants a long-term relationship, right? You want someone who has skin in the game. I've worked with vendors that I've worked with as I've moved companies, as they've moved companies, right? Because we've really built kind of, trust and understanding along the way. I think when I'm evaluating a partner, I want someone who is curious, they're asking me questions, and I think most importantly is they're not going to push a sale when the timing isn't right. And then track record, right? Track record is important. Having a good personality, you want a partner that you can, learn from, you work well together, you understand each other. So those are all really important to me when I'm choosing a partner.
Yeah, I hear you, right? I think from the communication personality standpoint, it is such a fast-paced environment that if you are working with somebody that you jive with, right? I don't think there's a clinical term for it, but jiving, right? To where they understand where you're coming from, even if you're not fully articulating it the way you want to, they're proactive on your behalf, right? They have skin in the game. I think that's often an overlooked piece to a very good vendor. I think a lot of these partnerships today may be transactional, and that's not necessarily the key to a strategic long-term partnership. Because to your point, they might just be pushing a sale from a one-sided value point rather than does this add value to our overall partnership?
And I think a good partner knows, if we perform well for the pilot, moving forward, there's going to be more opportunities. So it really is,
Right.
it's an investment.
That's that first date, as you kind of it is
Exactly. There you
dating.
go.
Let's do some speed dating. Let's make sure it fits. So I think that works. And I imagine in your experience that you've maybe run across some vendors that throw up some of those first date red flags. What about those past experiences can you recall on, or maybe help some of our listeners maybe learn from your red flags in the past?
Yeah, I would certainly say if somebody says, yes, yes, we can do it all to everything, probably a red flag, right? If they're not asking you good discovery questions,
Okay.
if they're not making recommendations, I think probably one of the worst experiences you could have is a vendor who you sign a contract, you're good to go, they disappear till the end of the campaign, and then you get a beautiful recap report, right? So I think you really want someone who is, on day three is going to say to you, hey, I have some ideas for how we could optimize. This isn't performing well. So someone who's fine giving you the bad news, if someone's just saying, yes, 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 this is great, I'd say that's a pretty big red flag.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think at the same time, from the marketer standpoint, you have a lot of spinning plates. You have a lot of demands on your time. So how do you navigate your time to allow for that feedback and allow for that kind of two-way communication?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Uh,
you really have to prioritize it. If you're investing a lot of money in a program, you have to be able to make the time to optimize. I also think part of, maybe in your kickoff call with your vendor, sharing the things that are really important to you so that they can just trickle up the information that you want to see instead of having to sift through, a big report, a big weekly recap. So just making sure you're, both in lockstep about what's important and what you need to achieve and what you need to share up to leadership.
and I think that kind of touches on, you mentioned that first date being the pilot and making sure that we're working together well. That's part of the execution. Is there any other part of that execution that stands out to you as important to making sure that maybe this is a long-term partnership that seems viable?
Yeah, I think if the partner is also open to feedback, I had a conversation with a vendor recently and I had very minimal feedback and I provided to them and they said, "Thank you so much for that feedback. This is something that we can apply to other partners. We'll make a note for your future campaign," so that you really feel that they're invested in your program's success. I think it makes a really big difference.
Yeah, I think viable long-term partnerships are two-way. And I don't think that a lot of vendors look at their clients in that manner as well. So that can create additional challenges or additional friction within that kind of ongoing development of what a long-term partnership looks like. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. I think we started off the conversation talking about how, the pandemic era has made this so normal in terms of video conferences, in terms of podcasts. I think that addresses a lot of, or that creates a lot of friction and a lot of challenges, especially when there are large marketing teams or many vendors in play. So, in terms of remote collaboration, how do you and your team work to overcome that with not only your internal teams, internal divisions, but also vendors that you value?
Yeah, I would say it's not everybody's style, but I think over communication really, really helps. Making context visible, documenting decisions, and also making sure when you're launching a project, maybe it's a quick Teams chat or a call, you want to make sure that not just the what, but the why is really clearly communicated. I
Right.
think that gets lost. We're not, sending Teams or Slack messages with vendors, but internally, I would also say that context gets lost a lot in those conversations. It's really hard to build relationships. So, all of that, whether it's with, I would say, your vendor, your marketing team, building relationships has to be super intentional, right? We don't have those, it's going to sound so dated, but water cooler, bevy machine conversations anymore that are happening. So, you really have to make an effort to build relationships because that's obviously the basis for executing great programs, right?
Absolutely. Do you miss the water cooler at all?
I do. I think I love working from home. I think certainly for people with young families with pets, it's amazing that you can take your dog for a walk, drop your kid at school, be at your desk at 8 o'clock or whenever you start. So I think there's so many benefits to it. But yeah, there's challenges building relationships, communication. Um, I know this is like silly and small, but if you have a 30-minute meeting on your calendar with your team, take 5 minutes to celebrate some wins and make people feel appreciated. I think for me, anyways, they make you feel appreciated, they make you feel more motivated. So, really easy tactics to just kind of overcome this kind of working in our silos, being remote.
We do lose that kind of human touch to
Oh,
business, I
yeah.
think, working remotely. I think, and I'll date myself as well. You talked about context. You talk about the importance of the why. I love that. I'm a big proponent in don't send a Teams message. Don't send 17 Teams messages when you can just hop on a quick call, right?
Absolutely.
Because it doesn't land the same, right? I'm myself. I'm a very direct communicator. Ask anybody that's worked with me for a long time, they know how to read between my messages and know that I'm not mad or upset or anything. But those new ones, I have to force myself to hop on a quick 2 minute Teams message or Teams call just to make sure that they can see my face and understand the tone of my voice. I think that that is something that we miss a lot in today's collaborative work environments.
Certainly. And I think also, when there's new team members on board,
Oh yeah,
always make an opportunity to just pick up the phone chat for 5 minutes on camera. Cause otherwise they may have no idea who you are, your
exactly.
intentions. So yeah, I very much agree with that.
And that kind of leads into the next challenge I see in remote work is kind of building that trust. You touched on it in a portion of your answer. I guess what strategies have you seen work best in building those strong relationships, whether they're internal or external?
Yeah, I think, like we said, everybody's really, really busy, but just set quick check ins, a coffee chat, right? Just kind of be intentional about making sure you're reaching out to people. Sometimes it feels like the only conversations you are having are transactional, right? Which is not incredibly motivating. I would also say a lot of companies and organizations have clubs and groups. I'm a member of our Women's Impact Network here at Conduent, and it just kind of helps you, besides for just getting out and working with other people, it is a good way to kind of inspire yourself and come up with more creative ideas and you kind of get out of your everyday bubble and silo. So I would highly recommend taking advantage of that if that's available to you.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point as well. You get outside of your team, right?
Yeah.
Outside of your siloed organization in some cases, where you can work with people in finance or sales or operations. And I think it doesn't do it justice. It doesn't handle it the way it did when we were in the office to be able to just walk across the aisle and talk to somebody, but it does add value to that overall relationship development.
Yeah, and you learn things that you wouldn't have maybe normally heard in your day to day. Some of the best
Right.
marketing ideas I think can come out of those conversations, just getting other people's perspectives. So, and also it's fun, right? It's
Right.
healthy, it's fun. There's value in that too.
Marketers and salespeople alike are typically social beings. So yeah,
Exactly.
we need that a little bit. So no, I hear you there. Which also kind of correlates into career trajectory and growth. And I don't think anyone I've ever talked to has felt like they got to where they are on their own, which is creates the importance of mentorships, which can be challenging in remote work environments. But over the course of your career, what would you say is the best piece of advice you received from a mentor that's just stayed with you and kind of directed you in your future?
Yeah, I have been really fortunate to have some really great mentors in my
Mhm.
life. People that I worked with 3 companies ago that I'm still in touch with to this day. So I have a couple of things that I've learned. This one's super simple, but it served me really well. Is I would say always take pride in your work. We are so busy. We're working on 100 projects, but your presentation, your Excel file, whatever it is you're putting out, take pride in it. I would also say never assume the one person you send it to is the only person that's going to be seeing that document, right? So
It's a big
take
one.
pride in your work. You'll feel proud of yourself. So I would say that's really important. This is probably more for someone who's a little earlier in their career if they're listening, but I would say 2 things are always be honest. Mistakes happen, never try and hide them, right? And this one I think is another one that took me a little while to figure out, but your boss does not have all the answers, right? So I would say, you should be curious, you should be asking questions, but when possible, always come with a POV, right? You can workshop it. You might learn that you're wrong, which is incredibly valuable. So, again, those are probably for someone earlier on in their career, but those served me very well as I was, as I grow and as I learn more.
Yeah, I couldn't a couple of things in there I really take to heart as well. I've always said, and I didn't create this, I stole it shamelessly from one of my mentors, but I'm where I'm at, not for the emails I sent, but for the emails I didn't send, is a big one. Right. And that kind of
I
goes
like
back to
that.
always assume that there are other people that are going to read that message. And, sometimes you need that perspective.
Maybe ties to that a little bit is this one's kind of hard for me because I know we're on a podcast, but I don't love talking about myself. But I would say as you're trying to grow in your career, visibility has to be intentional. Like don't be afraid to share your wins. I think a lot of people don't like to talk about themselves, but when we're remote, especially,
Yes.
you have to make that a priority, even if it's uncomfortable for you. And that doesn't mean emailing somebody every time you do something, but be intentional about it. And I think it's important.
Yeah, we actually create specific channels for that within our organization to celebrate those small wins because
That's
I
awesome.
couldn't agree more. You absolutely have to celebrate those, especially remotely. I'm sure, like you, we have people all over the world, different time zones. They very
Yeah.
rarely get any FaceTime. So, creating that bond over successes is absolutely integral.
Yeah, we do something here where we have, obviously a lot of companies have town halls, we have a marketing town hall, and we have something where you can nominate someone you think has done something really spectacular. It
Yeah.
might be just a portion of your town hall while you're covering, obviously, important content, but it's great for us to see from our marketing leadership that that's really important too. That sends a message. So communicate your wins, everybody. It's really important, and other people's wins too.
Absolutely. I think that's a lot of great advice for marketers in all walks of their career, even, ones that are looking to progress and maybe just getting started, but even the ones that have been in the game for 10, 15, 20 years and are still trying to overcome the obstacles that we deal with on a day-to-day. So I really appreciate that. I think on a closing question before we wrap up, if there's one thing you wish B2B marketers understood about building effective lead generation programs, what would it be? One point.
I think it really goes back to some of the items that we covered at the beginning of the conversation. I think relevance, relevant content, relevance, and intent beat volume every time. So focus on creating and pushing out relevant content that really, really speaks to your audience's needs, right? It's not what's important to your company, it's kind of what's important to them, right? And focus on getting those. It doesn't have to be thousands of leads. Get it, whether it's 100 leads, 200 leads, people that are really, really showing that intent. So leverage your tools, leverage your partnerships, and yeah, relevance and intent beat volume every time.
Love it. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, it becomes a math problem at that point, doesn't it? Right, when you're not chasing that majestic, huge number, it just becomes what is the most impactful thing I can do to the bottom line of my organization? And that gets everybody aligned real quick, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, Becca, thank you for joining us today and sharing your perspective. Really appreciate the insight. And thank you to everyone listening to From the Source. If you found value in today's conversation, be sure to follow the podcast and stay tuned for more conversations with marketers and technologists about shaping the future of B2B growth.